The night air was thick with tension as we sat across from each other, the dim glow of the candle casting shadows on her face. "I've been thinking," she started, her eyes not meeting mine, "about us trying an open marriage." The words hung in the air like a bad omen. I choked on my wine, the idea slamming into me like a freight train. Why? The single word was all I could muster, my mind racing. She fiddled with her napkin, avoiding my gaze. "Just new experiences, you know?" Her voice was too casual, too rehearsed. Something was off, but I couldn't put my finger on it. I spent nights tossing and turning, the thought eating at me. But I loved her, didn't I? So, in a desperate bid to keep her, I agreed. "Okay, let's try it," I said one morning, my voice barely above a whisper. She smiled, a bit too eagerly. Life took on a strange rhythm after that. She started working late, always citing some big project at the office. I'd wander through our silent house, her absence like a gaping hole. Then, I noticed the changes, the way she dressed, the new perfume, the hours spent in front of the mirror. My gut twisted in knots, a silent scream that something was terribly wrong. One evening, left alone again, I stumbled upon her phone, buzzing with a new message. Curiosity overcame me, a forbidden fruit too tempting to resist. I picked it up, and there it was, a text from her boss, laced with winks and innuendos. My heart sank. Betrayal, sharp and bitter, flooded through me. I sat there, her phone in my hand, the words blurring before my eyes. This wasn't just some adventure for her, it was specific, targeted. She didn't want an open marriage, she wanted him. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. All this time, while I was trying to save our marriage, she was weaving her web of deceit, ensnaring someone else in her trap. I felt like a fool, played at my own game. But as the initial shock wore off, a cold, calculating anger took its place. If she wanted to play games, then so could I. She wasn't the only one who could spin a web of lies. The stage was set, the players in place, and I was ready to make my move. This was no longer about saving a marriage. It was about survival, about not being the one left in ruins. It was like waking up from a bad dream, except the nightmare was real. The revelation hit me hard. Our open marriage was nothing but a cover for her affair. Anger coursed through me, but it was cold, calculated. It was time for some payback. But how? The answer came to me one evening, as sly as a fox, her sister, Emily. I started by casually bumping into Emily at the gym, feigning surprise. "Fancy seeing you here," I said, keeping my tone light. We struck up a conversation, and soon, we were chatting like old friends. She was blissfully unaware of the storm brewing in my heart. Then came the party, hosted by her boss. The invite lay on our kitchen counter, a serpent in our garden. I watched her prepare for the evening, her excitement barely contained. "You're going to be the star tonight," I said, my words dripping with hidden venom. She just smiled, clueless. The party was a lavish affair, a decadent display of wealth and power. She was there, floating among the guests, laughter tinkling like fine crystal. Her boss was always close, his eyes on her like a hawk. It made my blood boil. That's when I saw Emily, standing alone by the balcony, a stark contrast to her sister. I made my way over, a predator in a sea of unsuspecting prey. "Beautiful night, isn't it?" I started, my voice smooth as silk. We talked, laughed, and for a moment, I almost forgot my vengeful plan. Almost. But then I saw her, my wife, laughing at something her boss said, and the mask slipped back into place. I turned up the charm, drawing Emily in. She was easy to talk to, her laughter genuine. It felt like betrayal, but what was love but a series of betrayals? As the evening wore on, I noticed someone watching us. A man, standing alone, his gaze sharp and calculating. He seemed out of place amidst the revelry, a shadow in the glittering light. Our eyes met, and there was a flicker of something, recognition, perhaps? Before he turned away, who was he? A player in this twisted game, or just another spectator? You could have cut the tension with a knife the morning after the party. She was quiet, her eyes darting between me and her phone like she was expecting something to explode. I could tell she was rattled seeing me with Emily, her own sister. The irony wasn't lost on me. I played it cool, just a husband making breakfast, while my mind was racing. I had started collecting bits and pieces about her affair, a late-night call here, a hastily deleted message there. It was like putting together a jigsaw puzzle, each piece a tiny betrayal. My meetings with Emily became our little secret. We'd meet for coffee, disguised as casual run-ins. I was careful, always watching for prying eyes. But with every laugh, every shared secret, I felt a twinge of something. Guilt? Regret? I couldn't tell. Then came the bombshell. Her boss, influenced by her, made a risky business move. The news was all over the place. She came home that night, buzzing with excitement. "It's a game changer," she said, her eyes shining. I nodded, pretending to be impressed, but inside, I was filing away this new piece of information. The higher they climb, the harder they fall. Emily and I, we were in deep now. It wasn't just flirty texts or coffee dates. We were sneaking around, stealing moments. It was reckless, dangerous, and it made me feel alive. She was everything her sister wasn't: genuine, kind, unaware of the storm she was caught in. It was a cold evening, the kind that chills you to the bone, when I decided to drop the bombshell. We were in the living room, the TV buzzing in the background, a superficial normalcy. I turned to her, my heart hammering in my chest. "I'm seeing someone," I said, my voice steady. Her eyes widened, a mix of shock and disbelief. "Who?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Emily," I replied, watching as her face crumbled. For a moment, there was silence, a void where time seemed to stop. "You're lying," she finally spat out, but her eyes betrayed her. She knew the truth. The confrontation was explosive, a clash of accusations and denials. She felt betrayed, yet her affair with her boss continued, a glaring hypocrisy I pointed out. I leveraged my relationship with Emily to get closer to her boss. It was a risky move, but I needed to be in the game. We met at a business event, a casual introduction by Emily. "This is my brother-in-law," she said, oblivious to the undercurrents. His handshake was firm, but his eyes were calculating. I played the part of the supportive family member, all the while gathering intel. I learned about the risky business decision he made, influenced by my wife. The market was reacting, and not kindly. I saw my chance and took it. In a casual conversation, I dropped hints about my wife's loyalty, nothing blatant, just enough to plant seeds of doubt. "She's ambitious, isn't she?" I mused aloud, watching as his eyes narrowed slightly. The seed was planted. But amidst this chess game, there was Emily. She was starting to feel the weight of our affair, the guilt gnawing at her. "What are we doing?" she asked one night, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. I had no answer. This wasn't a love story. It was a war, and she was caught in the crossfire. It was like playing a game where the rules kept changing. The mysterious guest from the party, the one who watched with a hawk's eye, started showing up everywhere. At the coffee shop, the gym, even at a few social gatherings. He was like a shadow, always there but just out of reach. I couldn't put my finger on it, but he made my skin crawl. Meanwhile, the tension at home was like a ticking time bomb. She started looking at me differently, suspicion clouding her eyes. "What are you up to?" she'd ask, her voice sharp. I'd shrug it off, keeping my cards close to my chest. But she was onto me, I could feel it. In the midst of this cat and mouse game, I hit the jackpot. A friend who worked in tech owed me a favor. A few discreet inquiries, and I had irrefutable proof of her affair with her boss. Emails, texts, photos, the whole 9 yards. It was like holding a loaded gun, the power intoxicating. I bided my time, waiting for the right moment. It came sooner than I expected. Her boss, the one who seemed untouchable, started backing away from her. Rumors of the risky business decision had spread, and the fallout was hitting hard. He was in survival mode, and she was suddenly a liability. I watched as she scrambled to keep her world from falling apart. Phone calls went unanswered, messages ignored. The once confident, untouchable woman I knew was unraveling at the seams. It was a sight I never thought I'd see. It was like a storm breaking. The secret of me and Emily, my wife's sister, hit the public like a hurricane. I don't even know how it happened. Maybe a whisper here, a rumor there, and suddenly, everyone knew. Emily was devastated, her face a mix of shock and hurt. I couldn't look her in the eyes, the guilt eating at me. Then came the avalanche. Her boss, the slick guy who thought he owned the world, confronted her. I wasn't there, but I heard about it. A showdown in his office, voices raised, the final words cutting through the air like a knife. "It's over." He dumped her, right then and there. The affair, the late nights, all gone in a puff of smoke. She came home that night, a shell of herself. Her job, her pride, her affair all lost. She tried to explain, to justify, but her words were empty, hollow. I listened, a stone in my chest where my heart used to be. I should have felt victorious, but all I felt was a deep, aching sadness. I did what I set out to do, and now I was left with the wreckage. But the storm wasn't over. I went to her family, told them everything. The affair, the lies, the betrayal. It was like dropping a bomb in the middle of a family dinner. Her parents, her brother, they couldn't believe it. The rift it caused was immediate, a family torn apart by secrets and lies. The last nail in the coffin was her social circle. The friends who used to flock around her, drawn by her charisma and energy, now turned their backs. She was toxic, a scandal waiting to happen. Invitations dried up, calls went unanswered. She was ostracized, left alone in a world she once ruled. The day Emily left, the air between us was thick with unsaid words. I feel used, she said, her voice trembling. Her eyes, once warm and affectionate, were now cold and distant. This was all just a game to you, wasn't it? Her accusation hit me like a slap. She was right, of course. I had used her, but admitting it made my stomach churn. After she left, a hollow victory lingered in the air. I had won, but the taste of triumph was bitter. The house was quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence that screams. Then came the twist I didn't see coming. The mysterious guy who'd been lurking around, he finally showed up at my doorstep. I knew your wife, he said, his voice laced with a bitterness that matched my own. She ruined my life. He was an old friend of hers, burned by some past betrayal. He wanted revenge, just like me. It was like looking in a mirror, seeing the same rage and hurt reflected back. But his presence was a wake-up call. What had I become? Meanwhile, she tried to patch things up with Emily. I saw them one day, talking in hushed tones outside Emily's house. But it was no use. Emily walked away, leaving her standing there, alone and broken. That was when it hit me the depth of the destruction I'd caused. It was like a house of cards, and I'd pulled the bottom card. I had set out to hurt her, but in doing so, I'd torn apart so much more. To add to the chaos, her boss, the one who'd seemed untouchable, was now facing legal issues. The risky business decision he'd made, influenced by her, had backfired. I heard it through the grapevine investigations, inquiries, the whole deal. It was a mess. The office used to be my sanctuary, a place where I could focus, achieve, excel. But lately, it felt like walking into a minefield. My mind was elsewhere, tangled in the web of my personal life. Deadlines slipped by, meetings were missed, and my inbox was a mountain of unread emails. My team started to notice, their once respectful glances now mixed with concern and confusion. It was during one of these distracted days that her old friend, the mysterious guy, asked to meet me. We sat in a dimly lit coffee shop, the smell of roasted beans heavy in the air. I orchestrated all of this, he confessed, his voice low and steady. He laid out his plan, how he'd used the information from her past betrayal to manipulate events, to stoke the flames of my revenge. I listened, stunned. This whole time, I thought I was the puppet master, but I was just another puppet. His revelation hit me like a gut punch. The depth of his planning, the intricate details, it was all to get back at her for something that happened years ago. I felt sick, realizing I'd been a pawn in someone else's game of vengeance. Meanwhile, she was trying to put her life back together. But every step forward seemed to push her 2 steps back. Her attempts to find a new job were met with closed doors, the scandal a scarlet letter she couldn't shake off. I watched from a distance, the architect of her downfall, now powerless to help. My career, once my pride and joy, started to crumble. The scandal had spilled over, staining my professional life. Clients pulled out, deals fell through, and my boss, once my biggest supporter, now gave me looks of thinly veiled disappointment. I was becoming a liability, a risk they weren't willing to take. The day her family disowned her, the sky was overcast, mirroring the gloom that had settled over our lives. I heard about it through the grapevine. Her parents couldn't handle the scandal, the betrayal. They cut her off, a clean, cruel slice. She tried to reach out, but they were unyielding. It was final, devastating. It wasn't long after that she confronted her old friend, the one who'd been pulling the strings behind the scenes. I found out about their showdown in a downtown cafe, a public stage for a private war. Voices were raised, accusations hurled. He was unrepentant, cold. She left in tears, defeated and alone. That's when the weight of what I'd done really hit me. Remorse gnawed at me, a relentless, unforgiving beast. I'd set out for revenge, but at what cost? Our lives were in shambles, the debris of our once happy life strewn around us. Then came the news that her former boss was arrested. The risky business decision had caught up with him, and he was taken away in handcuffs, a spectacle for all to see. It added another layer to the scandal, a sensational twist to an already sordid tale. As if in a domino effect, I started losing friends. They couldn't look past what I'd done, the role I'd played in this tragedy. Invitations stopped, calls went unanswered. I was a pariah, tainted by my own actions. The few times I did venture out, I could feel their eyes on me, judging, condemning. Her life had crumbled to pieces, and I couldn't bring myself to look away. She was isolated, destitute, a shadow of the woman she used to be. The once vibrant socialite was now a recluse, hiding from the world that had turned its back on her. I couldn't help but wonder if my revenge had gone too far. One evening, I decided to reach out to Emily, my wife's sister. I needed someone to talk to, someone who might understand the remorse eating me alive. But when I broached the subject, she rejected me. The hurt in her eyes was evident, a reminder of the pain I'd caused. The public humiliation she faced was relentless. Gossip columns, online forums, even news articles, they all reveled in her downfall. Her name, once synonymous with success, was now synonymous with scandal. I couldn't help but feel responsible, the guilt eating at me. And just when I thought it couldn't get any worse, I received a call that shattered what little was left of my world. I was being investigated for illegal activities related to my revenge plot. The very thing I'd set in motion to destroy her had come back to haunt me. The walls were closing in, and I was trapped in my own web of deception. I reached out to her, a desperate attempt to offer help, to make amends. But she refused, her pride standing tall in the face of adversity. She'd lost everything, but she refused to accept charity from the man who had brought her to this point. It was a final rejection, a sharp reminder of the chasm that had grown between us. The chapter ends with me sitting in a dimly lit room, the weight of my actions pressing down on me like a vice. I had destroyed her, and in the process, I had destroyed myself. The investigation loomed over me like a storm cloud, and there was no escape. I was left to face the consequences of my own vengeance, a bitter taste in my mouth. The legal consequences hit me like a ton of bricks. I was facing the very system I had tried to manipulate for my revenge. Lawyers, courtrooms, and the weight of my own actions bore down on me. It was like a never-ending nightmare from which I couldn't wake up. As I navigated the legal quagmire, my wife lived in solitude. She was like a ghost, haunting the empty rooms of our once happy home. She had lost it all, and the solitude forced her to reflect on the choices that had led her to this point. The friends who had turned their backs, the family that had disowned her, it was all a bitter pill to swallow. In the midst of my own legal battle, I started to realize the hollowness of my revenge. What had it all been for? The satisfaction I thought I would feel was nowhere to be found. Instead, there was regret, remorse, and a profound sense of emptiness. I had won, but at what cost? And then came the news her former boss had been found guilty. The scandal that had rocked his life was now officially on the record. It further tarnished her reputation, a reminder of the wreckage I had caused. The story comes full circle with both of us losing everything. We were like two ships that had crashed into each other, leaving nothing but wreckage in our wake. We sat in the empty house, surrounded by the remnants of our shattered lives. There were no words, just the heavy silence of regret and consequences. As I looked at her, I saw a reflection of my own guilt in her eyes. We had both played our parts in this tragedy, both sought revenge, and both had paid the price. The story ends with us sitting in that empty room, lost in our thoughts, the consequences of our actions a heavy burden we would carry for the rest of our lives.